Lord, this morning as we are gathered here in your house, we are so privileged and honored to be a part of your family, and we thank you for this time. I pray that all the words that we speak, the music that we sing, the prayers that we read together, that all of it would be blessing to you, that all of it would be meaningful and precious in your ears. And I pray that you would meet us where we are this morning, challenge us, comfort us, help us to grow, and help us always to feel your presence close by. Amen. So I have a confession to make to start out with this morning. I'm not always the best listener. I can make that confession this morning because Meddy's not here. Otherwise, no. And don't get me wrong when I say that, because when I'm in the office dealing with issues, or if I'm talking with someone who's come to me because they're struggling or in trouble, I can absolutely zone in, I can focus, I can be intent. But unless the stakes are high, I have to admit that I'm usually processing and thinking about so many things at any given moment, any given time, that there's just not always room to focus on one thing in particular. And I've gotten to the point where pretty much when I meet new people, part of the introduction is, yeah, please tell me your name, but please don't be offended. I almost certainly will not remember it next week. That's just how it is. There's so much going on around the vibe of this new person, of everything else happening around me, that there's so many things I'm so interested in. I know, unless I can really find some kind of mechanism that really helps me lock in, if there's some kind of mnemonic type device or something to help me remember the name, I know I'm not going to remember it. So I just work it in and I say, please do not be offended. It's not you, it's me, but I will not remember your name. You'll probably need to tell me again the next time we meet. And people seem to be okay with that generally. So I appreciate that allowance, because it just is part of who I am. And a lot of that, again, it has to do with how much is going on in my brain at any given moment. And I wish I could adequately describe my mind, but words just fail to describe the maelstrom that swirls around in between these ears here. And in my life, I've found two coping mechanisms. One is that I just start shutting things out, especially at family functions when I just let Meddy take care of everything. Not that she appreciates that, but she's learned to accept it just the same. And the other is to amp up entertainment to 11, because that'll stimulate other parts of my brain and at least get me focused on something else. It's an escapism. But despite that reality of my brain, there are still things that when I hear, things that when I catch a glimpse of, they always can bring me out of that state and into a hyper-focused place. For example, mention baseball and I perk right up. I am happy to talk about WAR calculations and OPS all day long. I'll debate the Hall of Fame and who should or shouldn't be in it, and whether steroid era users should be included or not. Anything about baseball, I can talk for hours. Get me started on politics, and, well, you'll probably wish you hadn't got me started on politics. Or start bringing up, World War II and post-World War II era German theologians, and my mind is right there, and I'm ready to engage in a heartbeat. They grab my attention every time, no matter how distracted, no matter how unfocused I might be. There are things that I hear, words and expressions that I hear that will pull me out of that. And the thing is, I believe we all have these things, some of us more so than others. These moments that we find ourselves distracted, and these things likewise that will pull us out of it, that will make us stop and take notice amongst the noise of life. And we do this collectively as well. There are cultural things. We all react the same way to certain stimuli, certain events. For example, we all react the same way with that sense of cold, doom, dread when we see police lights charging up the road behind us. Even when we know we weren't speeding, and I know you speed, we don't have to go around that, okay? Or that our taillights were out, or even if we know we were being model citizens, we see those lights in the rearview mirror, and there's just a moment of, is it me? Did I do something? It's just there's a cultural sort of thing to that. Or we all react the same way when we hear loud jerks talking in a movie theater. And by the way, if you don't relate to that one, then I'm sorry to tell you, you are that loud jerk, and people really dislike you. And the truth is, we all tend to be a little overwhelmed in our postmodern, always online, always connected world. So we all feel a certain sense, a weight of that presence that's around us all the time. And because of that, we don't always pay attention, maybe as well as we should. You might even have just seen a couple weeks ago now, there was a significant study that was released detailing the way that AI usage has changed our brains. Even in the short time that it's been available to the majority of us, it has begun to actually change the way our brains process. We can now scientifically see that it's creating in us a less thinking, less understanding, and less attentive people. But the truth is, this isn't about the terrors of AI or anything like that, because this isn't a new phenomenon for us. We often find ourselves distracted. I read quite a few years ago, and it was a column that really struck me because of how stark it was, and I didn't believe it at the time until I started implementing it casually here, where this journalist was talking about how distant we are socially, how much we don't pay attention to each other. And so for a year, he would slip in things. So for example, when he was invited to a party, he would purposely get there late. And when greeted with a host, one particular party, the hostess greeted him, he said, "I'm really sorry I was late. I had to stop for a minute to murder my mistress, and it just took longer than I thought." And the hostess, without missing a beat, was like, "Yeah, we're all busy, no problem." Or someone would come up at the party and casually be like, "Oh, so what line of business are you in?" And in one particular case, he said, "Oh, I'm an executioner for the state penitentiary." And the response was, "How's business looking for you this time of year?" We're full as a society of distractions and of noises and voices. And it's not just fancy socialites at parties that have become thoughtless and sometimes vacuous. We all go into auto mode sometimes, and sometimes we live there a little longer maybe than we'd like to. And sometimes, in my case, again, it can be a defense mechanism against my own brain. Sometimes we're just kind of burned out. Sometimes we just think, oh, there's just so much to be bothered by. There's so much to be upset about. There's so much to feel righteously angry about, and I just can't muster any more for this particular moment or this particular event. And I get the feeling that is the same place where the Jewish believers in this story today were. I feel like they probably felt pretty similarly. It wasn't that they didn't care what was being said in the temple. It wasn't that they desired to sleepwalk through their lives. It wasn't that they didn't want to do better. It wasn't that they didn't care to try. But really, the burden of the law that they were under was simply so much that they eventually came to think, what can I reasonably do? What can I do against all of this that is so inaccessible to me that I can't possibly rise above? They're told daily by word and example over and over that they aren't pious enough, that they aren't as holy as the scribes and the religious leaders. The leaders of the day would routinely and publicly proclaim their inherent greatness and contrast it against all of the sinners that surrounded them. We see this in the story of the Pharisee and the tax collector. We see it multiple times with the way the Pharisees lift themselves up, always at the expense of the people. The leadership of the Israelites at this time lorded spirituality over the masses, while looking down on them and reminding them at every chance they had that they were spiritually inferior to the Pharisees and to the Sadducees. They were crushed under a burden of constant barrage of noise and of assault. And when you believe that there's nothing you can do to actually be better, and when your religious advisors and elders constantly remind you of that fact, that you'll never be good enough, and you suffer daily under a law that you can't hope to ever rise above, how could you not perhaps begin to glaze over just a little bit? How could you not begin to simply say, just another brick in the wall? They hear the same message day in and day out. And so it's become a droning in their ears. I suspect that we could relate to that. Hopefully not when you're listening to me, but I suspect that we can relate that. When the person in your life, and we all have this person that keeps telling you the same stories every time you meet them, they tell you the same stories, or that person that's just so negative and they constantly criticize the same thing, oh the youth, oh the this, oh the that, over and over. We all start to put that person on auto and just kind of, yeah, oh, interesting. We do that when they start speaking. We just figure that we already know what's going to be said, right? Why bother really paying attention? Because I don't need to hear this same old thing again. It's a waste of everyone's time and energy. It's like when I try to get my kids to empty the dishwasher. But then one day, a new rabbi steps up and begins to say something different. The scriptures say that he taught as one with authority, not like the teachers of the law. And the people, we're told, were amazed. Jesus' words are so different from what they've heard that they begin to break through this haze of noise, that they begin to break through this fog that the people have been living in. People maybe turn their heads the first time in a while and say, huh? That caught my eye, that caught my attention. Did someone want to talk about Bryce Harper's stats? Okay, I get that. For the first time in a long time, they're hearing something different. Something that doesn't just sound like the same old noise that they've grown so dead to. And it resonates with them. It connects with them. And this is Jesus' gift to the people of that time and to us. That he speaks truth. That he speaks truth that breaks through the noise, the haze, the repetition. And he makes them and makes us want to turn away from our tedium and our frustration towards something new. But that's only the beginning part of the story, because then Jesus performs this miracle on a possessed man, and the people then are well and truly blown away by what they've witnessed. As the expression goes, he had their curiosity, now he had their attention. They say, is this some kind of new teaching? And again, they bring up this mention of authority. I believe that is a key aspect here of the story. This what's being highlighted is that Jesus speaks with and possesses authority, and he uses that authority when he speaks. When he does, people can't help but pay attention. Think about it. This is the man who literally walked up to a couple of fishermen and said, put down basically everything you've ever done with your life and follow me. And they dropped their nets, their livelihood, and went after and walked after him. Jesus spoke with such authority that he could cut through all that was between us and hearing the truth. We get a clear picture that when he speaks, it reflects poorly on the rest of the teachers. The image we get is definitely one of teachers that are not then speaking with authority. Perhaps they rely on the authority of others to make their points. Maybe they're simply parroting too much of what other rabbis have said. Perhaps they, lost in their own fog, just have lost the ability to care. We don't really know what's in the heart of these men. And we get a certain image from the Bible for sure, but we have to remember that these are complex human beings with many complex human motivations and desires that go with it. And to boil the scribes and the Pharisees down to just mindless villains doesn't do them or us any favors. Instead, we need to remember that what was going on for so many of these men, we just don't know. We know that they had lost their way, but we don't know why. But we're rarely told that they're ever inherently bad people, and so we need to avoid making easy caricatures of them, and rather understand that for whatever reason, they, just like the people they were supposed to be guiding, were lost. And Jesus, for as humble as he chooses to be, was full of authority in ways they weren't. And now obviously we say, how could he not be? He's the Son of God, the one sent to bridge the gap between God and man. He has to ooze with authority. But Jesus chooses to only ever use that authority with compassion and with grace. Well, except for this one time in the temple when he whipped a bunch of money changers and tossed some tables around. But that's for a different sermon, so we'll talk about that on another time. But Jesus clearly had authority in his words, in all that he did. The Jewish listeners of that day hadn't heard anything new or different, apparently, in a really long time. They hadn't heard anything that was actually able to give them hope, to encourage them. They hadn't heard, in short, the good news yet. But that day they did hear it. They heard something completely different. They heard and saw that God was doing something new, and that God had something still to say to them. It pulled them out of their haze, out of their funk. It challenged them to break free from the grip of idleness and of skating by without actually paying attention in their lives. And that same message that Christ brought is one that God is still proclaiming to us today. God is at work in this world. And God wants us to wake up from our daydreaming, from our distractions, and from our purposefully attentionless lives. Yeah, it can be easy to glide through those, but the work of the Lord doesn't get done when we're living in that space. And that same teaching, that shocked the Jewish listeners so much, is still being proclaimed by Christ today. That teaching that Christ came to break the chains of the evil influences that seek to shape and control our world. That Jesus came with power and with authority over all things and at all times. Where are you coasting today? What parts of your life have you just grown accustomed to the noise and you've just had to block it out because it's just too much? And you say, I just can't be bothered with that anymore. That's not the way we were meant to live. We weren't meant to be swallowed up by the noise. We weren't meant to simply swim along to the currents that seek to take us this way and that way. We were made to follow a path that was set before us lovingly by our God. There is a lot of noise out there. Believe me, I get it. There is so much noise in our world. I think it's probably even fair to say there's more noise now than there was 2,000 years ago. But just like 2,000 years ago, Christ calls through it. Christ's voice and Jesus' commands cut through that haze for those who will listen. Christ this morning is standing before us, calling each of us, just as he called 2,000 years ago. Jesus calls us to look not at the distractions, to not become dazed, numb, indifferent, or tired, but rather to keep our eyes on Jesus and to hear the voice that has and continues to call humanity away from all of the light, the noise, the distractions throughout the ages, that calls us to look to the one who shows us the way. And the promise of life and communion with our God is as true today as it was when Jesus walked this earth. Do not let that voice be lost in the flood of noise. Focus on that voice. It can seem small sometimes, but that's okay. That's why we're patient and we listen for it. Focus on Christ's voice in your heart and see where it is that God says, I'm ready to shock you back into life today. Amen.